Hello everyone and welcome to a special edition of the Taylor Talks podcast. I'm your host Ryan Taylor. Today we'll be talking all things Toronto Wolfpack and the return of Super League and what the future holds for Rugby League. So I'm delighted to say I've got three guests instead of one joining me this time. I've got Andy Mazey of Rochdale Hornets, Matthew Shaw of League Express and Gareth Walker of the Daily Mirror. Guys, welcome to the show.
Hi Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
So Andy, I'll start with you first of all. Obviously, Rochdale, the first team to announce they're not taking part in the new summer tournament that's come about with no promotion and relegation. What were your thoughts behind that?
Yeah, obviously we looked at it. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. We looked at it on merit and looked at the detail. We waited on the detail coming last Friday. Sat on a call with the RFL, and then we obviously presented that to the board and we discussed it. We looked at all the various different elements to it: finance, player welfare, staff, contracts. There was many different things to look at, but all in all, we just felt it wasn't viable really certainly for our club and difficult to justify entering. So we had to make the decision, regrettably, to decline the invitation.
I mean, Matt, obviously, being with League Express, you'll know about this new summer tournament. How many teams would you expect to actually take part in it?
Don't know. Not many. I think there was that initial 16-team format, wasn't there? I think that was optimistic if we're generous. I think half of that's probably optimistic, to be honest, the way we're going at the minute. I don't know. I really don't think many will play. The problem is there's not, for any one individual club, there doesn't seem to be a lot of money for them to earn, and there's no guarantee you're going to earn the biggest prize pot of 70 grand that Gareth revealed anyway. So, it just seems to me that you're balancing risk and reward, and you're looking at it, and it's more risk than reward. So I don't think many are going to win it, to be honest.
Yeah, Gareth, obviously you revealed the £70,000 pot. Do you know the breakdown of what it would be if, say, Lee won it, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, they'll have to wait until they know how many teams exactly. What we've seen is a proposal based on what Matt said initially, 16 teams, and they've said a minimum of 8, haven't they? So if this is going to get off the ground at all, they're going to need 8 clubs. And as we speak at the moment, I don't think there's one putting the hand up, is there? So under the format that was outlined, if you won your conference, there was £35,000. And then if you went on to win the final, there was another £35,000, so potentially 70 grand there. But that's working on the basis and the presumption we can get 8 clubs to do it. And as it stands at the moment, I think it's fair to say that's looking unlikely.
I mean, it's a shame, isn't it? I mean, especially for the clubs like Rochdale and all the lower clubs as well. You look at Dewsbury, Batley, stuff like teams like that, where they don't know what the future's going to be, do they, next year? I mean, I don't know what any of you guys think about that.
Well, yeah, certainly from our perspective, we're because you can't control the situation we've found ourselves in this year. We've had to start looking at 2021, which is a big year for our club, and I can only really talk about our situation. Obviously, we enter the 150th year of Rochdale's existence, so it was always going to be a big year for us. And with this situation, the COVID situation, we've sort of thrown a lot of effort and all available sorts of time and efforts into building the plan for next year. So to have a competition that would start in October, running into November, would potentially compromise us in that, we'd want to be going into an early pre-season. Matt's keen to, obviously we've nailed a lot of the squad down. We'll have all our squad in place by then, and we want to be going into a big pre-season and focusing on next year. And we just felt that the competition at that time of year, with no guarantees that we can get, even get crowds in. We're still in limbo as to whether crowds will be able to come into stadiums. And some of the meetings I've sat in recently point towards the fact that crowds, when they are allowed back in, will be heavily restricted. So there's a lot of risk. I think Matt touched on it. It's risk against reward. And the reward wasn't deemed great enough and big enough to potentially compromise what we need to do next year, really.
I mean,
I was just going to say, just touching on it, and Andy will be in a far better position than me to comment on this, but it seems like looking forward, this year, as that financially, clubs are going to be fairly sweet, aren't they, Andy? I mean, there's no overheads or not much. You've had the furlough, you've had the Sky money coming in. So that surely most clubs are going to actually be better off than they would have been if they were playing anyway. But it's next year, isn't it, where the sort of issues are going to come if there's any Sky rebates, and then like you were saying, with crowds and whatnot. But at the same time, look, like clubs are recruiting like wildfire at the minute. So seemingly the clubs aren't too scared about where they're at financially.
I think, yeah, obviously it depends on your model and your financial model. I think those in Championship who've obviously got larger payrolls and larger central distributions will probably be in a good place, because they'll obviously be reclaiming 80% of their the payroll on salaried staff and players, and they'll be receiving full financial distribution. So I think this year, yeah, furlough's certainly been big for the sport and for clubs. From our perspective in League One, we don't have a massive payroll, so we've not really benefited from that. It's just helped towards keeping us sustainable this year, getting through the year, and with the efforts of the supporters and with the efforts of the board and everybody working together, we will hopefully come out of it in a relatively, a good place. That's the way it's looking now. But I think the ones in Championship, there will be some potentially who will have benefited from it. I think when I was at Swinton, obviously knowing what the payroll is there, they've had full distributions, and obviously they'll be using the furlough scheme. So I'd imagine they'll be in a reasonable, they potentially have a few quid in the bank.
I think the other point that was raised by John Flatman, who I know Andy's got a lot of time for at York, was the importance of next year as well for the whole sport, but especially Championship and League One, and the uncertainty of where we go without a TV deal in place at the moment beyond them. And he's making sure we all go into 2021 as strong as possible and make an impact that year, so that when we do go to the TV companies, whether it's as Championship and League One or as a whole sport, that the game is in a strong position. And although he said he wanted to get back on the field and play this year, there has to be kind of an appreciation of how important next year is, and not going into it in a weakened position, really, because that could help shape the sport for the next 5 or 10 years, what happens in 2021.
And obviously, Gareth, you spend a lot of time, obviously, with Championship clubs. You do a column in League Express for the Championship. What's the general consensus been around them clubs?
Yeah, I think every single club has a different situation. And I think that's important for people to understand as well. So whether you're talking about, some clubs might be able to train in one place all the time. Other clubs might train in 3 or 4 different venues during a week. And all of those venues could be community used, sports centres or schools, facilities. So when people are talking about, you should just get back playing, it was almost impossible for these clubs who trained all over the place, who don't have access to their own stadiums, to follow the safety procedures that were in place. And that kind of example can be used across a whole range of things. So every club has a different rental arrangement with their stadium. They have different liabilities. They have different payrolls. I speak a little bit to Mark Sawyer, who at the moment is in the very unique position of being chief executive of Bradford and chairman of Dewsbury. The RFL have granted him exemption to do that while the Bulls move through this current phase. And those 2 clubs that he's in control of have completely different circumstances, even though they're playing at the same ground or would have been this year. So it is different from every club. Every club has their own needs. Every club has their own situation, their own ingoings and outgoings. And I think people have to appreciate that when they just say, all right, we all need to get back playing now because this club can play. You look at a club like Featherstone, who have their own fantastic training facility on site that's used by Super League clubs. They are miles better set up to return to playing than a lot of other clubs whose training facilities might be, all over their town. So I think there has to be that appreciation of different circumstances, and there will have to be moving forward as well, because it's such a unique situation.
I think one of the things that probably, sorry, Andy, I think one of the things that the clubs who wanted to come back, probably the criticism that they've had, and not of all the clubs that didn't want to come back, but of some, there was a very defeatist attitude from the start, and there was no drive and ambition to get back on the field. Now, look, that might have been with merit in a lot of places, but it did seem from very early doors that a lot of clubs had already given up without even really exploring it. And I think it's that, beyond anything, that's probably got the backs up of a few. And as I say, it's not every club, because some clubs, I'd say a lot of clubs, couldn't come back, and they had valid reasons, as Gareth just elaborated on there. But there was, from where I was looking as well, it did seem that a lot of clubs saw it as an opportunity to take the money and consolidate and what have you, and then go on to next year without thinking whether they could or could not. Ultimately, the working groups were set up. They went through the process, which was the right thing to do. And ultimately, I do think they've come to the right decision. I won't debate that. But yeah, that's probably the thing that upset them a little bit. And the talk of delay tactics. Were they delay tactics, or were they simply due diligence that you had to do? You know, that's an argument that Andy's probably better to discuss than me, to be honest.
I think for me, I do speak to chairman in the championship, and like Gareth says, everybody's in a different position on this, and everybody has different models and different different goals and different ambitions. And obviously, I understand fully Mark's point at Featherstone. You know, I speak to Mark. I do talk. I've spoke to Derek recently, and I can understand Derek's position, because these guys are, they're investing. The clubs are looking to try and get into Super League, and to have this situation come along is really it's tough on those guys, because it does kick them a bit harder than it kicks others. But and they're probably looking at some of the guys in their competition who probably from very early in the piece have looked at it and thought, well, we'll be better just wrapping up and getting through to next year, which it's been probably looked at as not having ambition. But at the same time, I think as a sport, it's very important that everybody comes through and we all get into next year and beyond. So it's a difficult one to look at and put everybody on the same level, because clearly people aren't on the same level, and not everybody's got different circumstances. But I think the RFL's objective was always about getting a sport through this pandemic, getting the sport into a big year, which is a World Cup year, and being as attractive. Like Gareth says, we've got to be as attractive as possible to broadcast partners and commercial partners, to give them confidence that we're a sport that's worth investing in beyond 2021.
I mean, I've got to ask your guys' opinion on this as well, because I know when I mentioned that I was doing this podcast, a lot of people wanted to ask this question. I know we weren't going to have any relegation from Super League, but do you think that maybe one team could have been promoted and had an extra team in Super League next year? Would that have worked?
I think the big thing is integrity of competitions, and it's something that's preached to us as clubs in our sport. And ultimately, when you get to a stage where whatever we're going to do and whichever way it goes now, there wouldn't really be a competition that you could class as being, if there was a proposal to play a limited number of games in Championship and League One, which could have meant that you wouldn't have as many home games I don't know. I just think that whichever way it would have gone, had we tried to play on, there just wouldn't have been enough integrity there to warrant promoting somebody and warrant relegating somebody either.
It's subjective, isn't it? And everyone will have a different opinion on it, I think. If the reality is, you look at the clubs that are pulling out now, and it's clear that not many want to. I mean, some of the clubs that have pulled out of the competition, the autumn ready, we're fairly keen to get back on the field, as an example, but they pulled out of this. The problem is, what is meaningful? And this was a question that the RFL this was another criticism from Derek and Mark, that they never really got an answer on what a meaningful competition is. Now, if we went round just this chat, we'd probably all have different opinions, slightly, on what a meaningful competition would be. Now, Lee would probably go, well, if there's two teams and only two teams want to play, let them just play for that 12th spot. But then others would say, you'd probably all need to play everyone. And some would say, no, you need to do a full season. So it's a really difficult one. I don't know what the answer is. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But again, that I can understand the frustration of Mark and Derek on that, because they ultimately never got an answer. So they never knew what they had to try and how many they had to try and get on the pitch to have that shot at promotion in the end.
Yeah, it's difficult because, like you say, everybody's going to have a different view on that one, aren't they? And dependent on where you are in the food chain and the pecking order, your view is clearly going to be different. I do sympathise, as I say, with Derek and Mark and some of the other guys at the top end, because ultimately they're driven and they invest in the sport for an opportunity to get to the promised land and the elite level, don't they? But certainly, I think the right decision's been made in the end, because I think it's all about, we've got to move forward in 21, and we've got to have everybody, ultimately will be in as good a place as we can be now, with the support from the government, with the furlough scheme, and obviously with other things and initiatives that clubs are working on. I think we can all get through this, hopefully through this pandemic, and hopefully get into the new season in 21 now and focus on that. If there is a competition, obviously at the back end of the year, there'll be clubs who may deem that as something that they want to do and can generate some income from, then good luck to them. But certainly from my perspective, I just want to see Rochdale in a strong place in 21 and beyond, and that's been the thought process throughout now, really, is let's focus on what we can control, build a plan for next year, and move forward.
So obviously now I think it's time to talk about the wolf in the room, and rather than the elephant, the Toronto Wolfpack. I've got to ask, first of all, what were your guys' initial thoughts when we announced that we were going to do a Toronto team then years ago in 2016? What was your thoughts when we announced that we were going transatlantic?
Who's going first on this one?
I'll go.
I'm happy to go first. I mean, I've always, when it's first announced, I think the very first reaction, and I think anybody who said otherwise, it's a bit difficult to accept, but it was so out there at first that you thought, how can that work? But when they started to put a bit of flesh on the bones to it, and they got some people involved with a bit of credibility, I was excited by it. And then when it started and we saw that there was going to be crowds in Toronto watching these matches, I was very much, I was pro, and still am pro Toronto, because I think there is a market there for rugby league. And, if you love the sport, I struggle to get my head around how you can't be excited about the prospects of a big city like Toronto suddenly almost stumbling across rugby league, inviting our top players there and offering players at all levels from our country, the chance to go across there, see a bit of the world and play in front of an excited new crowd. I always struggle to get my head around why you don't think that could be a good idea. Now, that notwithstanding, I can accept why people were sceptical about it, and there'll be some people now saying, I told you so. But to me, from the start, it was an exciting opportunity, and if we could make that work, I thought it could potentially open up a whole new area of interest for rugby league across the world.
What Gareth
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think I've been very pro-expansion, because I think, and the North American market really intrigues me, because I can see, everything that's been talked about. The nature of our sport lends itself to that North American, Canadian. The way they like sport played, and they enjoy watching impact sports. We're very much of that ilk, aren't we? So I can see, and you can see the progress that's been made over the last 2 or 3 years in respect to the crowds over there, the match day experience. Everybody that's been out there, even ones who've gone out with a negative view on expansion in Toronto, seem to have come back with positive reports and positive things to say. So I think while the last couple of months has been disappointing and a negative for the sport in respect to the struggles that they're having, overall, I think it's been good for rugby league. I think it's something that I'd like to see continue, and hopefully, I've got my fingers crossed that they come through the difficulties.
I mean, Matt, you obviously wrote a piece online this week about why you're in favour of Toronto. And you mentioned, obviously, you've been out there a couple of times. I've been on league duty to the stadium before. What was your thoughts on the actual match day experience over in Canada?
Best normal regular league game I've ever been to in terms of atmosphere. They just do it different to us. And I think, look, there's clearly business-wise a lot of things that Toronto need to improve on, and no one would doubt that. No one, even me, I'm like Gareth, I'm very much pro-Toronto, but you won't find me defending them for not paying the players and for jumping out of the competition on 2 weeks' notice. It's just not acceptable whatsoever. But there is a lot that this sport can learn from Toronto Wolfpack. Andy will have seen it in his experiences out there, what they do to make it an event, not a match. It is an event. You want to get casual fans in. How many of those people are proper rugby league fans that are in that ground? They're not many. but they're there for a good time, and we need to accept that we don't do that. I think supporters struggle to accept that theory because they love rugby league. They are rugby league through and through, diehards, and there's nothing wrong with that. No one's having a go at that. But ultimately, if the sport's going to grow, it's got to attract those that aren't quite as passionate about rugby league, that want a good outing. And we don't do that as a sport. And not all, I don't want to paint every club with the same brush, but generally, as a sport, we do not do that in this country. We are pretty terrible at it, to be quite honest. And that's what Toronto can bring. And I'm certain that when Super League clubs went out there, if they got the opportunity to go with the players and whoever else, they would have got it. They would have grasped it, and they would have seen what they bring to this competition. At the minute, Hull are the only Super League club that have been out there. And I remember Danny Maguire, gushing about the experience out there. And that's from a Super League legend. So I'm absolutely convinced that they bring the game if they can be run, and most importantly, if it is viable long term. You would have to say, with the position they find themselves in at the minute, it isn't viable long term. But if they can restructure, get new or whatever, if it can be made to work, we shouldn't give up on them. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with Matt, and anybody who's listening and not read Matt's piece this week should definitely do so, because it's a balanced piece that says, as Matt just said, you can't excuse some of the business stuff that's gone on recently. And, let's be honest, they've been dogged by rumours of that throughout the whole existence. And that needs to stop, and they need to find a new, better way forward. But I spoke to John Wilkin the other week for a piece, and he made the point that Matt did there, that if those Super League clubs themselves had actually got over there and seen what they're doing, their opinion on everything might have changed. He said that's the biggest shame out of all this COVID situation, was that before these Super League clubs, the big clubs who've been around and successful for years, have had a chance to see firsthand what this Toronto experience is about. They can't appreciate probably what they're doing and what the potential might be. And I just hope now that the Toronto Wolfpack can find a way to get those Super League clubs there one day, whether it's next year or whenever. And let's all just open our eyes and be receptive to it, rather than sit at home and slag them off for everything and say this and that without having got full information. Or and let's be honest, you're in a fortunate position if you can be able to go to Toronto. But if you have, you've had a good time, then you've seen what the potential is, then let's talk about that rather than just slag them off for everything and say this is no good for rugby league, because clearly there have been things that they've done that are good for rugby league and can be good for rugby league going forward.
The thing that I struggle to grasp with it all is this obsession with asking what Toronto bring to the game. Everyone says, what do they bring? What benefits do they do? But if you're going to scrutinise what Toronto bring, why don't we scrutinise every other club, which we don't seem to do? There are clubs that have been around for however many years. I'm not going to name any names, it's not fair, but why don't we scrutinise what they bring to the game to earn their Sky money? Why is that never brought up? Why is it only Toronto or only Catalans? That's what I don't grasp. And the other thing, like Gareth touched on, a big problem with Toronto, naturally, is fans want to go watch their team play. Going to Toronto is expensive, and you are in a privileged position if you get to do that. Completely understand that. But at the same time, people seem to want to wear the fact that they can travel down the M62 to watch the team as a badge of honour. Well, I don't think that that's something that, as a sport, we should be really happy about. I think that's a very individual, selfish mindset, to be honest, where you're thinking, I can go watch my team, but you're not thinking about what's good for the sport. You're thinking what's good for you. And for me, I don't think that's something that we should be really happy about. And it is a mentality thing. For sure, you look at football, people have no problem going on a Tuesday night to Exeter or wherever, Stevenage, Dover, wherever you want to go watch a game of football. You really can't travel from Hull to St Helens all the way around. You have to travel the length of the M62 on a Thursday night. Everyone moans about it. Well, surely we've got to see the bigger picture and realise that that is a privilege, and not a privilege for a fan, but not something that I think we should be absolutely delighted about as a sport, to be honest. I think, if anything, it's a bit of a failing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I've not been to Toronto yet. I'd love to go. My brother's been a couple of times with Rochdale and said it's fantastic. I've not been, but that doesn't shape at all my opinion of what they can bring to the game. And like Matt said, I think it's just a bit a bit narrow-minded. You know, the reality of the current situation, even before COVID, is that some families won't be able to afford to take their family to Hull on a Friday night if they're from St Helens because of the cost of tickets and stuff like that. That is a fact of life in everything, you know, but it shouldn't kind of cloud the overall what's good for the sport. You know, we shouldn't just see what's your own situation, I guguess. You know, there's a guy on my street with a bigger house and a nicer car, but it doesn't affect what I think about, you know, cars in general, or that's just the way it is in every single walk of life. And I think we just have to have a bit of a broader look at what's Toronto bringing to rugby league. Can they make the game more exciting? Can they take it to new people? Can they be viable? If the answer to those questions are yes, then let's give them a bit of support.
I agree. I think we often judge things by bums on seats, don't we, and supporters being able to go to grounds. But the big factor in all this, in my belief, is that for us to grow the game, we've got to access those new markets. And if I'm a broadcaster and I'm sat looking at things, I'd probably really be encouraged by watching some of the big traditional clubs, your Leeds, your big cities, your Wigans, your Saints, but taking on Toronto and playing over in a big city in the North American market. That's surely got to be, you know, from a TV perspective, broadcast perspective, that's got to be deemed as big ticket, hasn't it? And with respect, you know, some of the fixtures that we currently have, they don't have that appeal as far as I'm concerned. And if I'm looking at it purely from a broadcast perspective, you know, it's small town versus small town versus big city against a big city in North America. Surely, in terms of getting eyeballs on the sport, there's a difference, isn't there?
Yeah, and then just to pick up on what you said, Andy, even before they went to Super League, this is what I struggled to get my head around at first. I remember when they first came in, was the first match Coventry at home, I think it might have been. And it was shown over here on a Saturday evening. It was a fantastically sunny day in Toronto. There was a big crowd. And my initial thought then was, if you're flicking over and watching that and you're not a rugby league fan, it looked fantastic. You know, there was a lot of people there having a good time. It was a beautiful day, so you could sit there and watch all these people having a great time. Because it's rugby league, the action on the field was good anyway. But if you were flicking through that, you know, on a fairly miserable, whatever it was, April evening in England, it just looked exciting. And that was, with all due respect, a League One game that was an absolute mismatch. Now you turn that into Toronto v Leeds on a Saturday evening, you know, and two top teams going at it in front of a big crowd. If you're flicking between channels and fall on that, to me, that's an exciting prospect for rugby league. And I really struggle with that initial negativity. That night especially, I can remember, I'm probably a bit more reserved in my Twitter activities now. But I just remember sitting there watching that game and seeing a lot of negativity about whether it was the scoreline or the markings on the pitch. And I couldn't get my head around it because I just thought, this should be exciting for rugby league. This is potentially the dawn of a new era. And it was full of people moaning.
The thing for me, and it's an unpopular opinion that will no doubt get the backs up of a lot of people, and I don't think they want to admit it, but I just think a lot of people are threatened by Toronto. I think a lot of it boils down to the fact that they see Toronto as a threat to their club's aspirations, and that's not just at board level, but I think it's at the level of supporters as well. This is a generalisation, and there are exceptions, don't get me wrong, but whenever I'm looking at my Twitter and the replies and everyone moaning about Toronto, it's normally the same clubs. It's normally the likes of Hull KR, Featherstone, Lee, Wake, all the clubs that are either gunning for promotion or are normally down at the bottom trying to keep the Super League spot. Now, for me, that kind of sums it up. It's because they are a bigger risk to those clubs than they are to a Leeds, a St Helens or a Wigan. And don't get me wrong, there are Warrington fans and whoever are against it. I'm not saying it's completely rule of thumb that, but generally that's how it seems to be for me. It's no surprise that the clubs that have seemingly been in support of Toronto in the last couple of weeks have been your likes of Leeds Rhinos and St Helens and Warrington, because they don't have as big an impact on them. And I don't even really blame clubs or supporters for that, because in life you do think about yourself. You know, we see it in this sport, you know, it's full of self-interest. I don't blame people for that. I don't think that's anyone's fault at all. It's natural. But I think I do think that's the case. I think people are genuinely just threatened by what Toronto can bring.
I think one of the problems for me, Matt, is there's a lot of things that are not in the public domain, or possibly are in the public domain, but get overlooked in that people have got this sort of thing in their head that they're a baby of the RFL, or they're a project that's funded or supported by the governing body, and it couldn't be further from the truth. There's this perception that they get favours, they get preferential treatment, and it could not be further from the truth.
What favours do they get? What favour? People talk about how much it costs every team to go and play against them. What did it cost you at you to go to play Toronto?
Well, everybody else at the table, whether that be Super League or in our divisions as members, are receiving an amount of cash every year in central funding, and these guys haven't had any whatsoever from day one. I think my view on expansion is, I think if we're going to do it, we've got to back it. That's got to be Super League clubs, Championship, League One, the full sport, RFL. If we're going to buy into something and we're really going to try and expand the sport, we've all got to be on the same page with it. And there's an argument to say that we haven't really supported Toronto in the way that we should be doing as a sport when they do bring potential, real potential in terms of broadcast and other things. We should have really been pushing behind them, and I don't think we have. There's been a resistance to some degree from what I can see, and there's a lot of things and a lot of untruths, I think, that get spoken about. They certainly couldn't be classed as any preferential treatment from the governing body, and I don't think they've had any favours really from anybody that I've seen.
And let's be honest as well, and again, Andy, you're in a better position than me, but if you put any other club from Super League, Data League One in Toronto's position, in that there was no Sky money coming in, no furlough, and they couldn't access the government loan, how many clubs would still be solvent right now?
There you go. Yeah, I mean, there's clubs obviously in Championship that if and when there's a reduction in TV funding and potentially no TV funding at some point, we'll be in real trouble. Absolutely in big trouble. So that's where a lot, again, the perception thing is, Super League get preferential treatment. Super League have to have preferential treatment. The elite level of our sport. If Super League's not on television, we've all got a problem. The sport has got a problem if that's elite level of our game isn't back on Sky TV. We have got a problem because it's going to impact us all in the pocket. So when people, again, I read some of the Twitter pages and Facebook pages, and the perception is, nobody cares about Championship and League One, and Super League are getting all their own way. It's absolutely imperative that Super League are back playing as soon as possible for the good of all of us. So again, sometimes it's disappointing to read some of the things because it's not understanding the real true situation, is it?
I mean, Andy, obviously you're someone who at Rochdale had the partnership with Toronto. What's been your thoughts over what's happened and the situation with Rochdale and Toronto? How's that looking for the future?
I concur with what Mark said earlier. I don't in any way, shape or form condone non-payment of players and staff, and it's absolutely a red line in my view in rugby league and my involvement in rugby league. The first thing when I walked through the door at Swinton, that club was having real problems, couldn't pay its players and staff, and I sat down with the coach and the staff and the players at the time, and they'll support it. I said, from this day forward, you will be paid. Can't guarantee you'll be paid the amount of money you'd like to be paid, and we'll budget accordingly. We'll cut a cloth, but you'll absolutely get your money on time, and you'll get paid every month. And I've always stuck to that, whether that be in my day-to-day business or in rugby league, and that's got to be a principle and an ethos of any rugby league club, in my view. But so I don't like that bit of it, and I think it leaves a bit of a nasty taste, like Matt said, when the competition's left in limbo 2 weeks before it's starting. Having said that, I've got sympathy for the situation. I think that COVID, they've had difficulties clearly with payments before that, but certainly COVID hasn't helped. They've not had the government support that all our clubs have been entitled to. There's mitigation around certain elements of things that have gone on, I believe, but it's just, I just hope they can come through it. Not selfishly from our perspective as dual registration partners, we'd like them to come through and we could carry that relationship on. But for the good of the sport, I think we do need, and we don't know which way it's going to go. I've texted David Argyle a couple of times, and I've been in touch with a few of the guys there, but we genuinely sort of don't know which way it's going to play out, and we're watching this space the same as everybody else. But I just hope, for the good of rugby league, that it can come through, and they can kick on. And I'd like to see them in Super League 2021. If I'm honest, I know that won't be popular with everybody, but I think the game needs it. I think we need it.
I
think the game.
Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I think the game, as we mentioned before, it needs that chance to see. They haven't had the chance in Super League yet, have they? They've not even played a home Super League game. So, if we're going to take this approach that we're going to let them into Super League, we're going to let them come through the divisions, accept them into the top flight. It will be such a shame now if we have to walk away from that and we've not seen what the real potential is. I'd love to see them have a full home program in Canada. Let's see what the crowds are like. Let's see if that changes the opinion of a few people in Super League. And if it doesn't work after that, then I think people will be more accepting and say, look, we've had our best shot at it. It'd be a huge shame if we don't get to see that chance now for me.
I think one thing as well that's probably worth noting is that it's been mentioned about players not having enough players to fulfil fixtures. I think ourselves, certainly as a club, we were supportive. We offered players to help support them, and I know that other clubs did. So it would be unfair to say that nobody's tried to help them at all. I think there has been a bit of support, but clearly the problems are much greater than just not having enough players to fill for fixtures. I think the COVID situation, it impacts travel, it impacts logistics, it impacts finances, and it's just a difficult position for everybody. And I think that's been certainly tenfold for Toronto, because they've not had the government support that most of us have had, and I don't think they've even got access to the RFL loan fund either, have they? So, you do have to feel for them. At the same time, I'm sure that they'll learn lessons. I'm sure I'm not speaking out of turn by saying that as a sport we need clubs to be sustainable, well managed, and make sure that players have got to be paid, and staff, if that's their primary earning and their careers and livelihoods, it's got to be absolutely safeguarded, and people have got to be paid.
I'll ask the two journalists. When did you guys first start hearing rumblings of what was going on? When did you first realise that maybe Toronto weren't going to be able to compete in Super League after all the coronavirus situation?
Genuinely, the first I knew of them withdrawing were 10 minutes before the announcement was made, and I think most clubs were the same. Genuinely, there was no talk of them dropping out. It was never. Me and Gareth speak quite a lot, and we didn't even really raise it was never really even in the pipeline, was it? It was nothing that we ever discussed as being a possibility, and then it was literally dropped on us 10 minutes before announced. So huge shock.
Yeah, it was to me. We did the story, I think it was 5 days earlier in the Mirror on the visas thing, and we led with the fact that Super League, that Toronto had told the other Super League clubs they might not be able to fulfil their fixtures this year because they had this issue with the 7 overseas players. And I've spoken to David Argyle, and we did that piece. Now I wrote that without thinking for a minute, to be honest, that they were serious about withdrawing, and obviously it emerged that financial things were part of this decision as well. I thought at the time, this is come on, RFL and Home Office, we need to sort this out and make sure we can have our 7 players playing. So although I did literally write that they threatened to pull out, at that point I wasn't thinking that was a realistic proposal. I was away for the weekend, actually, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I thought it'd be a nice quiet weekend to go away that for Rugby League before we start again. And then on Monday afternoon, when I was walking around the zoo with my family, I started getting texts that Toronto had pulled out. So I never, like Matt, I thought that what they'd said before was a bit of a brinkmanship over the visas to try and push their case. I didn't see at all that they were going to pull out of it, and I didn't know anybody in the game that thought that was a genuine proposition at the time. So on that Monday, it was definitely a bombshell, and I think for all people within the game, not just journalists, I think people were thinking that what had gone on before was a bit of threats to try and help their position. I don't think we expected us to be looking at 11 clubs just 12 days before the restart.
I think I was very surprised on the Monday. Because I was in communication over that weekend, the Saturday, Sunday, and the Friday, and I offered some players to help support them. We offered a couple of our guys who would be willing to step in and support. So they were what I'm getting at is they were genuinely trying to come up with a way to move forward and fulfil the fixtures. I don't think it was ever planned. I don't think there's anything underhand. I just think that, you know, obviously having seen the developments on the Monday in the statement, it was a lot bigger than just not having the players available. I think the finances and the implications of COVID have created a situation where they've deemed it just, you know, not viable or impossible to continue.
Yeah, even this week I've been on we had like a national newspaper thing with Robert Elston, who right from the start had kind of outlined his scepticism about certain areas of Toronto, while saying he'd hoped it could work. But Robert was very clear in saying they felt as an organisation that Toronto were doing everything possible, you know, up to that point to get back playing. They don't think there was anything underhand, and this was part of a plan to drop it on Super League with 12, 13 days to go. They felt that they were doing everything possible, as Andy said there, and he stressed that point as somebody who hasn't been particularly pro-Toronto publicly anyway. So, you know, I think they were trying, and I think it's just added up. You know, it started a bit with this visa issue, but then the finances and the late wages, and it's just all accumulated, and the lack of support, you know, from governments over here and in Canada has all added up. And at the 11th hour, and it was the timing of it that's not done them any favours, you know, with people who are Toronto sceptics. Doing that less than 2 weeks from the start of the season has given them ammunition, I think, and that's what's got a few more people offside, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely trying. We share the training facility over at Hotwood, and you know, the conditioner was on site, and there's talks obviously around the protocols and the biosecure measures that needed to be implemented on site, etc. So there was an effort being made to try and mobilise and get things in place, but clearly, the difficulties, all things told, seemed that they were just too great, and I'm sure it wasn't a spur of the moment decision to withdraw. I'm sure they thought long and hard about it, but ultimately they made a decision that they deemed either correct or one that was made out of necessity.
I mean, when did you guys first hear about the non-paying of wages? Is that a problem in the Championship, or did it only literally just occur when they pulled out the competition?
From my perspective, I've not heard anything about non-payment of wages till very recently. I'd seen a few things, as you do. You read a few things on Twitter, don't you? But you're always going to get situations whereby players have left clubs and they've had a few things to say, and maybe things have gone on. So I'm always careful not to read too much into comments on Twitter and maybe bitter players and agents that have had bad experience with a club who want to go out and maybe a bit of dirty linen in public. So I try and stay away from all the he said, she said stuff and read official. I like to follow these two guys because the things that they generally put through the public domain are usually spot on. So I don't like to get involved in the tittle tattle, but clearly there's been issues. You can read into that, can't you, from recent comments? But it's one of those things. I genuinely do hope that there's a way forward with it. Certainly for the players and the staff, I hope that they can be paid. I hope that the club can move forward in some form. And there's, as Matt said, I'm sure they're looking at different models, different ideas, different ownership. Maybe David's put that out publicly that he's willing to look at different ownership models. So I think it's just a case of, from my perspective, from the sports perspective, it's got to be fingers crossed, because to put that on the scrap heap now, especially with Ottawa coming in next year, Ottawa should be a follow-on to an expansion, not a replacement of an expansion club that's failed.
Yeah, just on the wages front, I'm sure Matt will have a similar thing. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. There've been rumours around Toronto and late payments for a long time, and you always try and follow these things up. And I know a couple of lads in the Toronto squad. I'm sure Matt does as well. And they've never wanted to speak out about it. So when it does crop up, people think nobody's following it up. We do get in contact with those people, and they'll either say, no, there's nothing in it, we've been paid, or there's been a couple of times, I think, where they'd had a bit of a heads up and said, look, this might be a few days late, this is when it's coming. And I'm the way I operate was I would always rather get somebody on the record. So I'm not one for having unnamed sources and people who don't want to put their name to it in the public domain. You know, if you're unhappy with something, if there's a situation that needs airing, I think put your name to it. So we did do a piece in the Mirror, I think, almost 2 years ago now, where again it had gathered momentum that they hadn't been paid. And David Argyle went on the record at that point and said, "Yeah, look, this is my bad. This is on me. They haven't been paid now. They were told they'll be paid then, and that's been late, and they will be paid then." And they were paid in the end. I think John Wilkin referred to it recently. But it has constantly cropped up. There's always been murmurs, and it's a bit of a juggling act because there's so much Toronto scepticism out there. As soon as there's a whisper of anything, certain people will jump on it and use it as a stick to hit them with. But it has to be based in fact, and it has to be based in people who are prepared to say, "Look, this is what the situation is. I'll say it publicly." If not, you can be dealing in tittle tattle, and it's a dangerous game. That.
Yeah, Gareth's right. I echo basically everything he said. I've been rumours for a long time, and as Gareth said, there have been a few times where it's been a few days late. But the players and the staff don't want to go on record because they don't see it as a big deal because they've been given a heads up. But you obviously get the rumours that still come out. The other thing as well that I think is important to point out, they're not the first and they won't be the last to pay players late. Not like that. I mean, this is just unacceptable. But, there are cash flow issues from time to time, not just in rugby league, business. It's not ideal. It's not great. I'm not defending it. But, there are other clubs in rugby league that over the years have struggled. And you do, as a journalist, get to the point, well, where do you draw the line? Because if you're gonna report that at one club, you got to do it at every club. But really, and that's the thing. And I do think there's probably a bit of a gunning for Toronto. Skepticism. It's easy to pander to people by hitting them with anything you can. It's like they've unpaid kit suppliers. That's one that's come out at the minute. I could probably reel off right now 7 or 8 clubs over the years that haven't, but they've never been reported. And I'm not saying that makes it right. It doesn't make it right. Of course it doesn't. But they're not the first and they won't be the last. It is something that happens at most businesses for whatever reason. Not most, that's unfair, but it does happen at businesses. But for whatever reason, it doesn't get reported. But with Toronto, and the same, look, you could say the same for Bradford.
It raises.
It happens to them as well.
I think it raises some concerns for me moving forward, though, Matt, if I'm being honest, because I think obviously we are looking at further expansion at the moment, with Ottawa and New York, and these issues are, something that primarily I think cash flow issues could be. You could relate them to the fact that they've not got a central distribution. So all the other Super League clubs, if they're getting a monthly allowance, which is roughly proportionate to the payroll. Because if they're capped at, say, 1.8 million, 2 million, and they're getting that monthly coming in to cover payroll, then there shouldn't be any excuses for not paying your players in that situation, because your central funding is primarily covering your payroll and your staffing costs. So you couldn't really condone somebody who's on central funding not paying anyone. No. Whereas the situation with Toronto, David or whoever the investors are behind it, are raising capital to pay those wages and payroll. And I've seen a couple of articles that have been in the press recently that have alluded to the fact that David has been not necessarily had the liquid cash, and he's had to unlock assets to be able to create funds and pay wages. And that situation, is something that other clubs don't have because they're using central funding. Obviously, they top that up with their own ambition. If they want to spend and have marquee players and a big spend, they supplement that with commercial revenues and owners' input. But it is a different situation. It's unique, and that does raise not alarm bells, but certainly concerns for the new franchises moving forward. I feel that there's got to be some kind of bond in place to ensure that cash is there to pay wages. If you're coming in and you're willing to submit a budget, and that budget has to stack up, I feel that there should be a bond in place to cover that payroll element of that, so that there's a guarantee that the lads and the staff are going to get paid. Because for me, it's a concern. I don't want them in any new franchise, and it's not a criticism of Ottawa, because their business model most likely is different, and Eric is a good businessman, he'll have his own plans, but I'd like to see some concrete evidence that this situation isn't going to happen again.
Yeah, I think that's very fair from Andy, especially with the non-central funding thing, because I think what has happened in the past in rugby league is that when clubs have had issues, short-term cash flow issues, and this is something else that doesn't get made publicly quite often, they can have advances in their TV monies, so the RFL know how much they're paying them over a course of the year. They might give them their November payment in, September, because they need to fulfil that and pay the wages. And that will, 9 times out of 10 will never be made public. But that does happen in the sport. And obviously when you've got these expansion clubs without the TV distribution monies, they don't have that kind of little fallback thing. And so the bond thing is probably a good idea because, as much as we've all said, we like Toronto and the idea of it and the potential, the sport doesn't need another situation where you've got especially full-time professional players. It's not good at a part-time level, obviously. But when it's their main income and they're paying mortgages and looking after their families on that, to be 2 months late is not right and can't be something that happens in rugby league regularly.
When you sign off and you submit that budget, in my view, there's got to be guarantees in place. And I think when you're a member club and the way we operate as clubs within the RFL membership is there's sustainability regulations, there's caps, etc., which help you manage that process and ensure that clubs can get through a season and are sustainable. I don't know whether that's the same with Toronto being a non-member club. I don't know their projections and budgets get submitted and who ultimately, sort of underwrites the spend that's outside of an income generated for the business. Presumably there's a massive spend outside of what they generate, and that presumably falls on David and his fellow shareholders' shoulders. What's the mechanism for actually guaranteeing that there's a commitment there? Is it a point whereby you can get halfway through a season, you can get fed up and walk away? Well, that's not good for the sport, is it? I think there has to be certainly a minimum on an annual basis of a guarantee and a bond around that particular year and budget. And, if it's a 3 to 5 year plan, that's got to be a 3 to 5 year commitment and bond, I believe, because we can't have this situation coming again, can we, with any of the franchises that may come in future years. We've got to ensure and safeguard the sport. And I'm sure the RFL will be doing. There'll be a heck of a lot of due diligence been done around the ownership and the models and the people behind these clubs. But certainly I'd like to see evidence that we have got a mechanism in place to safeguard staff and players.
I mean, I'm going to ask this, and I'm not being a sceptic before we say anything when I'm asking this, but do you think maybe Toronto starts this season not winning a game in Super League? Do you think maybe if it was in position near the top, they'd have pushed harder to try and get themselves back ready and back playing?
No, I don't. No, with there being no relegation, it meant nothing, did it? I don't see what they have to gain from that regard, to be honest. No,
I agree with Matt there. I think regardless of the position, I think there's an argument to say they just turned it round on the field. They've beaten Huddersfield in the Challenge Cup, and I think they had players back.
Not this
year. Players were on the way back. They'd just beaten Huddersfield and put in a strong performance at Huddersfield. So I'm sure that Brian and the players were, seeing light at the end of the tunnel and looking forward to getting back playing. And certainly the injury problems they had, I would presume that come the end of lockdown and now, they would probably have a fully fit squad if it wasn't for the bigger problems and the bigger picture. So I can't see that being a sort of influence on the situation at all, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. And I was there that night at Huddersfield, and they were starting to look like a team, weren't they, after that bit of a shaky start. So, yeah, I can't see that having played a factor at all in it.
I mean, I don't know if you guys have spoken to Brian McDermott over the last few weeks, but I'm guessing he must be very frustrated, mustn't he, then, that everything seems to be going positive, and then all of a sudden all the hard work he's done against Toronto Wolf has been pulled away from him.
I got a text through on Friday, asked if I could do an interview, and it was typical Brian McDermott, just I'll politely decline. That's not. I don't know where he's at. They're all going to be frustrated, aren't they? Players want to play, coaches want to coach, and ultimately they're not being able to do that. So they well, there's no but. They will be frustrated, and at the minute it's a very difficult position for them to be in, really.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Brian, there's sometimes a bit of a negative perception towards Brian, because he's not frightened of of sort of speaking his mind, is he, in the press, etc. But my experiences of him personally, he's a great bloke who, I think he saw the big picture with it. I think he sees that in order for them to be successful long term, they've got to develop some Canadian talent. Between us as clubs, we were developing a partnership at Hotwood before this situation came about, whereby we were looking at jointly working on community initiatives and developing rugby league players. So, why there's a criticism levelled at them that it's all about Super League and it's just they're not doing anything for the game. Brian is very pro expansion, but he's also pro developing players. He's given a lot of youth opportunities in his time at Leeds. So I have a lot of time for Brian. I don't know him very well. Matt, our coach, knows him a lot better than I do, and they have a good relationship. But I just hope he's in a good place, and I hope the boys are in a good place. And I said, fingers are crossed for them. I want to see him come out of this situation if it's possible, and hopefully try and move forward.
I mean, I've got to ask as well, obviously, with Toronto as well, a big positive that I've not even mentioned yet was the fact that they managed to lure Sonny Bill Williams into Super League. Surely that screams a positive expansion, getting a player like Sonny Bill into our game.
Yeah, I mean, that was big for the sport, wasn't it? And for Super League, a lot of the Super League launch, the competition launch, was built around Sonny Bill, wasn't it? And the fact that we were bringing a North American team into the comp this year. So let's not forget that while Toronto have paid his wages, there's a lot of us in the game ridden on the back of Sonny Bill, haven't we? And the promotion that he's brought to the sport. But again, was it a straw that may have contributed to breaking the camel's back in terms of paying him what they've paid? I don't know. Financially, could you justify the outlay on Sonny Bill for the ultimately the reward that's been sort of gained by it? I don't know. That would be one for the Toronto club to decide whether that's been worthwhile or not. But from a rugby league perspective, absolutely brilliant. Brilliant for the game to have players like that. Warrington are doing the bit, aren't they? They're bringing Inglis over and some of the other star players we've got in the competition. Again, we talk about broadcasters and broadcast markets. They want to see that, the big hitters playing in our competition. And Super League is Super League Europe, let's not forget, and Catalans are doing the bit as well. They've got, Folau came with a bit of baggage, didn't he, and a little bit of negative press, but there's an argument, and the two guys on here will no doubt be able to justify, there's an argument to say that there's no such thing as bad press, is there? So, we did raise eyebrows in the the sporting world when people like Folau were coming in, Sonny Bill, and I'm sure Sky TV view it as all contributing towards eyeballs on our game.
I think it's been interesting to hear the comments of Peter Volandis over in Australia, the head of the ARL Commission, who's effectively running the sport in Australia, and his view on Sonny Bill. I mean, they're almost bending their rules to get Sonny Bill in their competition, even though he's going to the strongest club that everybody likes to have a pop at in the Roosters. But Peter Volandis was saying publicly that, basically what Andy said there, this guy creates profile and interest for our sport. We'll get more eyeballs on it, more people talking, more media coverage. So he's prepared to even bend their rules a little bit to get him in there. And that it seems to have a very far-sighted vision, Peter Volandis, where he makes big decisions when they need to be made for the good of the overall sport. So he's not looking at it just as, well, Sonny Bill's coming in to help the Roosters win a third title in a row. I think there'd be uproar here if that same situation, if someone, say Wigan or somebody, brought somebody in and they bent the rules there. But his view is an overall sport thing, as this guy's good for our competition, good for our TV ratings, good for the income, good for sponsorship. Let's get him in and let's do it. And it's a different view to that some people have over here.
People have ridden on the back of it, and while the club supporters are sort of negative towards it and against it, there's a lot of clubs that have ridden on the back of that. Promotion of some of the early Super League games were all about come and watch Sonny Bill Williams, weren't they? And quite rightly so. If he was coming to Rochdale to play in a Challenge Cup game, every billboard in Rochdale would have his face on it, as far as I'm concerned, because they are marquees, the marquee people, and not just players, the marquee sportsmen. The name Sonny Bill Williams is, it connects with some of the big sports people in world sport, doesn't it? So I think we've got to be thankful, and it's when people say what do Toronto bring to the game, they've brought profile. They've brought profile to the competitions that they've played in as they've progressed. There's a lot of people, they shouldn't be smashing everybody in League One and smashing people in Championship, but the same people would be mourning if they'd have been fast-tracked to Super League. So you're never going to win, are you? You're never going to win, but just fingers crossed it can continue, really, because it is, whether people like it or not. If I'm sat at Sky Sports and sat at BBC, I want Toronto in there, and I want to see Sonny Bill Williams on me, on my Friday night slots and my weekend slots in the Challenge Cup. I want to see Sonny on the BBC. I want to see Toronto on there, and that's the, no disrespect to any of the other clubs in the comp, but that's sexy as far as I'm concerned. North America gives us an angle that, in years to come, hopefully can be really fruitful for Rugby League.
I mean, I'll ask your guys your opinion now on what do you think should happen to Toronto next year? Do you think they'll have any sort of punishment, e.g. a points deduction or a ban in place or something? What do you think will be the reaction for next year from Super League?
Well, I'll start because, and I'll be honest, I don't know. I don't know. There's got to be some sort of sanction, but what? It's difficult. I really, I thought long and hard about this, and I don't know what would be the correct punishment. I don't know what's a fair punishment. There's times like this where I'm quite certain and genuinely say I don't know, to be honest.
I think it comes back to how much the game wants Toronto and how much Super League wants Toronto, because ultimately, if you look at it and say, well, we need them back next year because of all those reasons we've spoke about, then we can't penalise them too heavily, because if David's sat there right now and he's trying to put a plan together to take the club forward, create investment, maybe bring investors on board, I don't know which way he's going with it, but ultimately if you stick 12 points deduction on them, they're ultimately going to be relegated next year. If I'm an investor, I'm not going to go and put my money into that. So I think it's got to be a level-headed approach to it, to say, well, let's be honest, if we don't value them and we don't value all those things we've been speaking about, then see you later, they're gone. That's one option, whether we like it or not. It could be see you later, close the door behind you. That might be the route Super League take, I don't know. If we value them, if we feel that they're, the part of the future and the bigger picture for expanding the sport, then I think we've got to try and work with them and certainly agree some sanctions, but whether you put a sanction on them that's ultimately going to hamper them moving forward in the future, I think that would be counterproductive. So I don't envy the guys who've got to make these decisions. I don't envy, Robert at Super League and Ralph over at the RFL. I don't envy the position they're in at the moment, and I feel sorry for all parties really that they've got to deal with this at this stage when all the emphasis and focus should be on about our sport taking the field again at the weekend and talking about how great it is, and hopefully hit the ground running like the NRL did.
Yeah, I'm with these guys. It's tough, isn't it? I mean, there's a big part of me that thinks you've got to sanction them, because I don't think the timing, especially of what happened, was particularly fair on anybody. But at the same time, not even if you just deduct them points, if you slap a big ban on them, that's not going to help them financially be okay next year either, is it? No. So maybe perhaps instead of sanctions, if they do decide to keep them, and as Andy said, getting rid of them is an option that will be considered. But if they decide that they want them in Super League next year, perhaps there has to be this kind of bond that covers at least maybe the first 2 seasons in there up front or in place, so that the clubs know that's not going to happen again, rather than sanction and put things in place that mean they will be able to come in and compete on some kind of level footing, because ultimately we can't have it again. Now, my thoughts just when you guys were speaking then was, Robert Elson and Super League talk a lot about their conversations with Sky, how regular they're in touch with them, how important they are to the game, how massive the next TV contract is. There's got to be a big train of thought that says, what is Sky going to think if we sit down and A, we've kicked them out and that's it, Toronto's done, we're not interested in North American expansion, or B, we sit down and say, look, we've taken a wider view, these are part of our competition, we've put this and this in place, we want them to be part of the package that we give to you. which one of those two does Sky prefer? Because ultimately, and you get people slagging off Sky, which is something else I can't get my head around because of the greatest sponsor in the history of the sport over here, the why we've got a full-time professional game. And what they think when they sit down and see what we as a sport have done with Toronto, whether people like it or not, that is very, very important, especially at a time when we're negotiating a new deal. So how Sky look at this whole situation has to be a factor, like it or not, in what the sport decides to do with Toronto Wolfpack.
It's an important piece. I think the broadcasters' take on this situation is very important, as well as the views of the Super League clubs. It's the broadcaster will inevitably, I would imagine, have a major bearing on this situation if they think that Toronto is something they need for broadcast reasons in there. I'd imagine that will be a factor. Can't really say. None of us guys here are privy to the conversations, and we don't know which way it's going to go. I just hope, from a rugby league, as somebody who's loves rugby league as we all do, I hope the conclusion that the outcome is the right one for the game.
I mean, you guys have probably already touched on it already, but how frustrating is it that yet again we're talking about another club suffering financial difficulties? We had Witness last year, we had Lee in 2018, we've had numerous other clubs just financially going wrong. How frustrating is it for you guys as journalists and as fans of a sport as well to see it coming around again?
Well, I'll answer it as a fan. Sorry, Gareth. Me and Gareth are obviously journalists, but realistically, and you could say the same for anyone in the media, we're all fans of the game. And what winds me up is we have, in my opinion, the best products in sport on the field. And it's not just because clubs are in financial difficulty, but all we end up speaking about is drama and politics off it. And it completely overshadows the strength of the sport. And it pains me. It pains me. And I know that people say, well, it's the media that run it, but team pulls out of the competition. They can't just ignore it. Go, but it's all right. They're on the pitch. It really does get to me that we spend all our time talking about arguments and bickering and scandal, but not about some unbelievable athletes playing an unbelievable sport combined to make, for me, the best sporting spectacle we've got on a weekly basis. And I just think that that's where the sport badly hinders itself, to be honest. And it is quite depressing, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with Matt. And as a fan of the sport, it's tough when it happens, and you've got to do it as part of your job. And I don't like it. I think sometimes we're probably a bit tough on ourselves, and we forget that other sports have these problems as well. I think the thing that stood out there that Matt says, which I definitely agree with, is we are too political a lot of the time. So there's too much politics and infighting in rugby league that does overshadow it. But I think with the financial stuff or with negative stuff that happens off the field, maybe with a player or a club, that happens in every sport, and we are kidding ourselves if we say it doesn't. Bury FC went pop last year, and caused a huge disruption to the Football League. And that happened in the middle of the season or whatever. And it does happen. Rugby Union has a scandal where they were having fake blood putting on, players to get them off in the blood bin. Every single sport has its off-field scandals, has its financial difficulties. I think where we probably almost exaggerate in our own mind is because we're always fighting for media space, as Matt will know. We're always trying to push rugby league's cause, and we probably think it doesn't get the nationwide recognition that it deserves, so that when we do have to write about negative things, probably people see it as being more a bigger deal than it is. But these things do happen in other sports. We probably just need to get a bit away from the politics and the infighting and be a bit more unified and help ourselves. But accept that sometimes you're going to get a player that does something off the field that he shouldn't do. Sometimes you're going to get a business that falls into trouble. That does happen in other sports, where we need to help ourselves, probably just being more unified as a sport, stop fighting with each other over things, and just take a bit of a broader view to help the sport generally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right, Gareth. I think we sometimes have the glass half empty rather than glass half full mentality in rugby league, don't we? And I think we are inclined sometimes to talk things down rather than talk them up. And I'd like it, personally, if we could, look at the positives from this. If you think about other sports, as you say now, as we stand at the moment, we're talking about an isolated case of one club that's in financial difficulties.
Who have completely unique set of
exactly that, yeah.
Any other sport, don't
as a sport, I think the way that we're positioned and the way the decisions have been made to protect the whole sport, as it stands, Super League's going to come back. We're going to tick the broadcast box. We're going to get our sport at elite level back on the television. And the rest of the clubs are, as far as my understanding is, are protected to some degree by distribution and furlough schemes, etc. And the support of the main stakeholders, obviously the fans, being as supportive as they are. And I think we should be flipping that and saying, actually, rugby league's not in a bad place here. You know, football, lower leagues particularly, there's going to be a lot of, I believe, fallout in the coming weeks where they've got to try and get back playing possibly behind closed doors and then with restricted crowds. And I think football, certainly at the lower levels, will be in a lot worse position than rugby league potentially is. So flip it round and look at it positively and say, as a game, we're not too bad here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you mentioned football, Ben. I'm a Bolton fan, so I know all the situation that's gone on there with money difficulties and what it's going to be like behind closed doors. And that's what people forget about football. It's always like League One, League Two teams are in a similar position to Championship and League One rugby, where they need the crowd, don't they, and the fans to help keep the sport going and keep that level going. Because I think a lot of fans in Championship and League One rugby always look at the perception of Super League doesn't care about the Championship or League One, and I think you guys will argue that's not the case, is it?
Well, it's like the thing with Challenge Cup recently, isn't it? I've seen a few tweets of, it's all about Super League. Let's make sure those 10 clubs can carry on playing in the Challenge Cup. But the reality is, if the Challenge Cup is just shut down, then that prize money from Coral and the TV money from the BBC goes. So like with Andy, Rochdale will have got a certain amount of prize money for reaching a certain amount of the competition. These 5 clubs that were outside Super League still due to play in it get a certain amount of money for reaching that. Now, if Coral say, well, you've scrapped the competition, they're within their rights to pull their sponsorship money for that year. The BBC would have lost, 4 weekends of live action and primetime TV as well, which they're paying for as well. That money goes. So the clubs outside of Super League would be hurt again. And as Andy said, with getting Super League back on Sky, it's not just so Super League, it's all right. It's so rugby league as a sport gets that TV money and it can filter down to the clubs outside the top flight.
We also try to make a scandal and out of nothing. It's like with the redraw, the Challenge Cup. You've got 10 teams left in the competition. You've got 4 weekends to do it in. You've got to find a way, a structure to do it. Can anyone give me a better way of doing it than doing a redraw where 4 teams play in the last 16? Yeah, everyone goes, oh, it's a shambles. The integrity of the competition is gone. And I had it come to me, and I just challenged them. Said, right, okay, how would you do it? There's no reply, and then they come back 10 minutes later. It's a shambles. So you had to do it. Just give me a better solution. And this is the thing. It's easy, and it was the league. This is the thing I think that people are struggling to grasp. There isn't perfect solutions here. You're always looking for the least worst, which is not the sort of mentality you want to have long term, but we've been forced into it as individuals, as a sport, and wider than that as well, as a world,
Ralph was very clear from the beginning of this pandemic. Ralph was always clear from the beginning of this pandemic that there was never going to be a perfect solution to any of this. It was clear from day one that, somebody was going to end up, upset by the outcomes of these things. And I just think that, again, and Ralph and Simon, they've been pretty, from my dealings and the meetings I've sat in, they've been really transparent in the approach they've taken on it. They've looked at the whole game view. And, Ralph is the first one to say in every meeting we sit on, listen, guys, don't go and bash us in the press. If you've all got my phone number, you've all got my email address, ring me up, call me, all the names under the sun. But let's do it off air and behind closed doors. And I think the more we can do that as well as clubs, and I've been guilty, don't get me wrong, I've been guilty in the past, I've had a few things to say when things haven't gone our way, but I am learning as I'm getting older that, as a sport, we've got to be a bit more, I think we've got to be a bit more professional about the way we handle things and do things, haven't we? And certainly bashing the RFL constantly doesn't get us anywhere. And not understanding the challenges that those guys are facing on a day-to-day basis. I mean, some of the secure systems and protocols around returning to training and playing is it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing, and to have put all those things together, and Ralph sitting on sort of calls daily with government and sitting on calls with other sports, and they've developed protocols to get us back. And we should celebrate the fact that our game's coming back at the weekend, and it's the elite form, it's the elite competition. It's coming back at the weekend, and let's be positive around it now. Let's move forward with a big World Cup year next year. There's a lot of exciting times. We can look at the negatives, or we can get that glass half full and look at what we want to do moving forward as a sport. And the challenges and opportunities are equal measure, aren't they? A challenge is there to be overcome, and an opportunity is there to be grasped.
Yeah, and opportunity is a key word in August, isn't it? Because there's not a lot of other live sports on now the Premier League's finished. So, these weekend slots in August when we're going to have 3 back-to-back games in Super League, or take that Challenge Cup weekend, it's unlucky for those 4 clubs that have been drawn out for the 6th round. But that's 2 games live on the BBC in an absolute prime-time spot where you get viewing figures that dwarf what Sky get for Rugby League. So it's crucial that we kept the Challenge Cup going and kept those TV slots, because in all probability we might get bigger TV audiences on that weekend than we would normally, because there isn't going to be much other live sport this month. So opportunity is a great word for August, and Rugby League needs to make the most of it now. We've managed to get in a position where we are going to be back on the field.
And we can showcase these sponsors that we've got in this sport, your Corals and your Betfred. I honestly believe Betfred have been one of the best things to happen to Rugby League in many, many years. The way they've focused on not only just being a commercial partner, but they've engaged with the sport. They're running shows and they're running live sessions on via the Facebook pages. They're really engrossed with Rugby League, and I think they should be celebrated, Betfred. I'm certainly really grateful and thankful for the support they're giving, not just to Super League, all competitions. And we've got to give, by getting these games back on TV, it's giving the profile that these sponsors need and partners need. Coral, everybody connected in a commercial capacity gets some kind of return for their investment, don't they? And that's crucial. It's vital for us.
I mean, before we touch on the return of Super League just in a bit more detail, I've got a couple of questions that, when I said I was doing this podcast, a lot of people wanted me to ask, so I'll ask a couple now. I've had somebody who said to ask the guys if they're aware of how much disenchantment there is in the game at the moment with lifelong fans who've been contributing to the game for over a number of years and now turning their back on the game. Have you guys noticed that at all?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. But how do I say this without sounding? I just think that with when you have these conversations and people say, "Oh, the game's on its backside," or "The game's dead," and you ask them why, and they come and they don't really have reasons. They just moan about things. They don't actually have any. I don't want to say valid points, because in their eyes they're valid, but in my eyes, I'm just looking at thinking they're not. They're talking about Toronto, or they talk about, oh, the game's just not as good as it was. Well, I disagree. It's a tricky one, and it is a problem. Don't get me wrong, it's a problem, but I don't know how to resolve it. And selfishly, a little bit, and I'm not saying I'm right, because everyone's entitled to different opinions, but a lot of the people that say those things to me, I think, as we touched on a bit earlier, that's all based on things that are a bit myth and just not true, just Chinese whispers about the game, to be honest.
Sorry, Ryan. I'm going to say this quite often comes up, I think. Now, I don't know when, I'm a bit older than Matt, probably similar age to Andy. I started watching Rugby League in the mid-1980s. And in the mid-1980s, Rugby League in this country was struggling. I've just been and got the Rothmans off my shelf. You look at the attendances. People look back at these eras with rose-tinted glasses because they see 80,000 people at Wembley every year, when it was a proper day out for the North, and that's fantastic. You look at the average attendances of the top 2 divisions there those years. The first year I went was 85, 86. The average attendance in the top division was 4,500 people. And in the second division, it was 1,000 people. Now compare that to some of the crowds. There's a list of the number of 5-figure crowds that year. Whereas in Super League, we get 2 or 3 every weekend, and we've got a completely full-time competition where you've got a club like Leeds that employs 150 people, many of them in the local community, spreading Rugby League around, areas that it wouldn't get to normally. And that happens at every Super League club. Now, when I started watching Rochdale in the mid-1980s, there was a few hundred people stood on crumbling terraces. It was it's amazing that people fell in love with it like I did, because it was a fairly miserable experience when you look back at it. The grounds were falling about around us. There were fire hazards. There was no full-time professionalism. And I hear this thing now that rugby league is dying. Well, rugby league was dying in the mid-1980s in this country. And for all its faults, and there are faults in the game at the moment, there are things we can do better. I think, like Andy said before, we have a tendency as a sport to look at the negatives too much. We now have a sport that must support. You run into thousands of people on full-time employment with the off-field staff. They're playing in stadiums that you could not have imagined, even in the 90s, places like, where Warrington and St Helens are playing now. Couldn't have imagined it. And it's a community sport played by boys, girls. We've got disability rugby league, learning disability rugby league. There are a million positives to what's going on at the moment. So yes, there are frustrations sometimes with a decision the RFL might make, or something that's going on, or a club behaving in some way. But to me, I think we look back sometimes with those rose-tinted glasses, and it's not based in reality. And there's so much for this sport to be positive about. And I think if everyone kind of got that message across more, there'd be a lot more people coming again and watching it, and the sport would be bigger as a whole.
Definitely, I think there's the world's a different place, and times have changed, and let's look back. Like you say, I was watching Lee at Hilton Park as a boy with my dad, and there's an argument to say that I was there partly because I loved it, but partly because there wasn't a great deal else to do on a Sunday, and the hot dogs were good. But that's for me. That's the facts around where we are as a sport now. Challenges on getting bums on seats. There's a lot of competition, and you can sit at home now with hundreds of channels on your television. You can watch live sport from all over the world. You can watch. We're competing with the biggest. The biggest football league in, the Premier League is the biggest enterprise in global sport, arguably. We're competing with all these things. So while you can always take that negative view and glass half empty and say, oh, well, rugby league's dying, and the expression used, the game's on its arse and things like that. I don't like it. Because I think, we're all stakeholders, and that passes down to supporters. Everybody's a stakeholder in the game. If you buy a season ticket, or you buy a shirt, you're a stakeholder in the sport, and there's a responsibility and a duty to, in my view, to talk that up and not talk it down. And I think, if we all looked at that with our own respective clubs, it's like Gareth says, there's the impact that these clubs have on the local communities now is far greater and far bigger and more important than it was in years gone by. There's, even looking at Rochdale now, we have a community foundation that's delivering a ladies team. It's getting ladies and girls playing sport. We've got a wheelchair team, getting people with disabilities to be able to play sport. We've got 2 full-time coaches who go into schools on a daily basis and interact with kids and young people and try and get them involved with the game. And I think there is always negatives, but you can always look at positives. Some of these top Super League clubs are big organisations who are doing a lot for the communities, and I think that's one of the reasons why the government give the sport a loan, is because it sees the value of what we do as a sport and what we are, and we should be proud of that. We shouldn't be too quick to push the negative button. I think we should always be looking more positively at things, and criticisms are great, but do them privately. If you've got an issue with a club, email them privately. Don't jump on social media and bash them and give the club you supposedly love a problem. Help them resolve the problem behind closed doors and privately. That'd be my view.
Yeah, it's a great view.
I mean, my thing
I did a piece for Rugby League World last year, and I basically put the feelers out. I did it on social media. I said, what is it about rugby league that annoys you the most? What's your biggest gripe with rugby league? And you know what the top answer was? The top answer was the pessimistic attitude of supporters in the game. That was it. I sort of categorised everything. I didn't say that you had to pick between these. I just let people reply. The biggest criticism for rugby league supporters was the attitude of rugby league supporters. Read into that what you want.
I mean, my thing with rugby is when you go to a game, there's not another experience like it. I mean, you have teams from opposition ends in mingling with each other. You have all the banter and everything, but you don't get with some of the other sports. But I agree with you, Matt. It's the fact that for every 3 out of 10 that are saying good things, there's always that majority, isn't there, that's pessimistic and kind of want the sport to fail, so then they can say, "I told you so," don't they?
Yeah, there is that. There's been. I genuinely do think that. And I'm always, well, I know I'm not very cynic to do saying it. I do think the attitude of supporters is the biggest problem in the game. I really, really do. And I know that people are probably a bit hesitant to say that because, obviously, you can't paint everyone with the same brush because not all supporters are the same. But as a general group, I think everything is so negative. I see it, and Gareth will have had similar experiences. When a team's doing well, so when Salford were doing well last year, and you put a complimentary tweet out about Salford, all you get were fans from other clubs saying, "Yeah, but they're only where they are because they've got Jackson Hastings." Well, so what? They've got Jackson Hastings. That's the point. And like, oh, but we going bust next year. Why can't you be happy that there's a good story? It absolutely drains me. It really does. I don't understand it.
Somebody somewhere within that organisation was smart enough to sign Jackson Hastings.
Yeah,
that's a masterstroke on the club's behalf, isn't it? Whoever that person was who managed to get him into the country, they pulled a masterstroke off that ultimately probably contributed to a grand final, didn't it?
Yeah, I just don't get it. I don't understand it at all.
It's a good example.
From a Lee perspective, we had what's it when Fui Moi and all the likes came over, and the Championship had them kind of players, but you saw the likes of Featherstone, Bradford, all them other clubs moaning that Lee actually had these players, and now they're paying them when you should sit back and watch some of the players who you never thought you'd see live in the stadium in front of you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's like with Toronto. Oh, they've bought the way up. Well, so what? Other clubs have tried to buy the way up. It's not illegal. We shouldn't be bemoaning the fact that there's really good players playing in the Championship. I just can't. I don't get it. I really don't get it.
Yeah, you don't see it in football, do you? When United, if United buy Jadon Sancho, you won't see the City fans going over buying the way to the league. You'll have a bit of banter, but you appreciate that you've seen a world-class young forward playing football for your club. I know Andy will obviously hope it happens being a United fan, won't you, Andy?
Well, obviously, yeah, that goes without saying. But no, you touch on Fui there, and Fui, I was still at the tail end of my involvement at Lee when Derek was trying to bring Fui over, and I remember sitting with at Derek's office at the time when I think he was taking phone calls on it, and I was thinking, geez, you pull that one off, it's going to put some bums on seats, and I think clubs have got to be encouraged and applauded for that type of thing, and Derek will he can sort of have his critics at times, Derek, but me and Derek have not always seen eye to eye, but certainly I've always had respect for his commitment and his ambition and his drive, and we do need people to have ambition in the game and want to put players on the field that people want to come and see, because Gareth referred to the 80s and what have you, and if you could get, at the time you used to have guest players come over from Australia, didn't you? And if you could bring a Peter Sterling over or a Wally Lewis, or you'd put 2,000 or 3,000 on your gate, and that's the kind of impact. We're looking at some signings at Rochdale. Matt's got and they're not names of NRL calibre or Super League calibre, but certainly lads who will excite fans and put bums on our seats, hopefully. And that's part of the sport. It's ambition, and to drive your ambitions comes at a cost, and you've got to sometimes put your hand in your pocket to do that, haven't you?
The next question I've got is one I don't know if you'll be able to answer now, but it comes from a Toronto fan, so we'll ask it. They said, ask if we've got any information regarding the financial circumstances around all of David Argyle's business interests and whether that has had a curtail on the effect at Toronto. I don't know if you guys will be able to answer that one.
I ain't privy to that info.
No. I don't know anything about David other than his rugby than conversations I've had in relation to rugby and dealings I've had in relation to rugby. I wouldn't even know what he does in terms of his day-to-day business, and that's exactly what it says on the tin. It's his business, isn't it?
And the last question is a bit tongue-in-cheek. They say, do you really think Toronto will last, or do you just want them to survive so you have a chance to go on holiday into Canada for the next few years?
Yeah, I'm hoping for this new team in Mallorca that's going to come in, so we can get a trip to Mallorca every year.
I'll tell you what, I've been working on my social skills, because the more people I can charm at the minute, the more free holidays I'm going to get around the world. So
I want to know where these free press trips are coming. I've not been to Toronto yet. I always hear this. I don't think people realise the actual state of the newspaper industry now. We're lucky if we get sent to Hull, never mind Toronto in these days. So, like I said before, as much as I'd love to go, you can't shape your opinion of whether they're good for the game or not. I would love to go. Like I said, my brother was lucky enough. He went with Rochdale a couple of times as a fan. Said he loved it. I'd love to get there one day. I hope I get that chance, whether it's just as a fan or working or whatever. I'd like to sit in that stadium and watch a game there.
Can I just clarify, by the way, because I had loads of people accuse me of this at the time. But last year, I think Toronto already paid for me to go out. I went as a supporter. people were like, "Oh, that's a paid trip." I'm like, no, it's not. I went because Facts were playing. That was the only reason I went.
You don't need to explain your dealings, Matt. We're not interested.
Sadly, I do. Sadly, I tell you what, it was a good trip. It was a good trip. Lots of.
I mean, some of the trips that you can enjoy as a supporter. I saw. I'm friends with a lot of the Leeds supporters on Facebook, and I saw them in the Super League season. They had some great times over at Catalan, didn't they? I've been on trips to Toulouse with Swinton, and I think these things, if you wind back to the 80s and you were very much watching lads playing a winter sport up to their eyeballs in mud and playing at Bramley and such, if you'd have said then that you could be stood in the sunshine in the south of France, enjoying a beer and watching rugby league and competitive, top end rugby league with full time and really good part-time athletes going at it, you'd have thought he was daydreaming, really. So again, let's be positive about these things. If you've got Catalans and Toulouse and hopefully Toronto can come through, I think the fan experiences, and it's all about the fans at the end of the day, isn't it? It's a supporter sport, and these are good experiences for our supporters that hopefully connect and connect them with the game and keep them with the game long term.
So obviously Super League starts back up this weekend. Obviously it's been months since we've seen a game. How excited are you to finally see that as end is in near and we're finally getting some players out on the pitch on Sunday?
I'm really excited for it, because while I do enjoy the NRL, in normal circumstances, I wouldn't really watch the NRL games, and I'd focus more on Super League, because that's where I'm proud British, and I'm proud of our competitions. And so while I've enjoyed this, don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed the NRL. I'm really excited for the Super League competition to come back and see our guys, really throwing a marker down. I think the changes to the game, while have been some have been controversial, I think it might speed it up. I think we'll see points scored. I think we'll see some exciting variations to what we normally see, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've done a column with Jamie Peacock, our columnist for the Mirror, for Saturday's paper, and he says get ready for a supercharged Super League. He thinks everything will be quicker, there'll be more points, there'll be more action, it'll be non-stop. There might be a few blowout scores early on, but let's go back to the whole thing of let's not moan about it straight away. It happened in the NRL. If that does happen, let's just ride with it and see how these new rules settle in. I think it's going to be exciting, and as we've said, August is a great opportunity for Rugby League and Super League to be showcased when there's minimal other sports on at the same time. Let's make the most of it and get the sport back with a bang.
Yeah.
And obviously the return of James Graham will be the first game live on Sky. As somebody who's done it in the NRL, coming back to his boyhood club to finish his career, how excited are you to see James back on the pitch?
It'll be interesting to see how it goes, won't it? The NRL press were fairly cynical, weren't they? And saying that he'd gone, which they had he did have one bad game, didn't they? Let's see. It is great to have him back. He's a character. He's a name. What's there not to like about it? And look, if James Graham doesn't have the impact that maybe you would have all hoped he would, what I would like to hope is that the guys that and this is all if buts and maybes, but if some guys do a number on him, we should be talking then up, not saying that James Graham's gone. but you know for a fact that'll be James Graham's gone. That kind of comes back to what we're saying, you know.
That would be my view, Matt. My take on that would be he's played in his pipe and slippers in NRL for a few years, but he can't hack it in Super League.
Yeah.
That's the way I view it. You know, you put that positive spin on things, don't you? You know, he's them Aussie forwards were easy for Graham. He's trampled all over them, but he can't get away with it against some of our boys.
And is there any team that you're more excited to see? I mean, I think for me, I'm looking at Castleford as a contender this year with some of the players that they've got, and Danny Richardson's proving a point over there. It'll be interesting to see if they carry on their early season form going into this new. Well, it's like a new competition, isn't it?
I can honestly say I'm excited to see most teams. You know, we've not seen enough of anyone to really form a proper opinion. You look at Huddersfield, you know, winning at Saints. And having a great start to the season, and can they maintain that? You know, you mentioned Castleford. I had Castleford to finish 9th, which did look a little bit daft at lockdown time, didn't it? But you know, they look impressive. Catalans, you know, won some games away from home. Got Maloney in there. There's so many teams that you look on paper and think they got a chance this lot, and that for me is what's so exciting about coming back now. You're sort of still sounding out every team to see where exactly they're at. And I think it's foolish to make any wild predictions at this stage.
I'm just intrigued to see what the viewing numbers are and eyeballs, etc. on the back of this, because I think it's a fantastic platform. Like Gareth said earlier, you know, we've Premier League's all done and dusted now, and you know, there's still a bit of a dearth of real high caliber elite sport on television, so it's a big opportunity for us to showcase rugby league now, and I hope that the figures are really positive, and that can only strengthen us going into next year's negotiations.
And it's nice to have a good double header at the start, isn't it? Some 4 good teams in that double header to start with.
Yeah, I think the fixtures they look quite attractive, don't they? Certainly, you know, they're all ones that I put on a personal level. I'm looking forward to watching every game, and the more games of rugby league you can watch, the better, as far as I'm concerned, over the weekend. So yeah, some mouth-watering ties there, isn't it, to look forward to? And like Matt said earlier, there may well be a few blowouts here and there, but again, that's to be expected in any sport. I think when the Premier League came back, there was a few teams took a bit of a hiding who were performing well before lockdown and got, you know, beat 3 and 4 and 5-0 in some cases. So, you know, it's a disruption. You know, they're not going to pick up where they left off, are they? And we've got to give a bit of time to get back in the swing of things and adapt to the rule changes also.
Well, guys, obviously I've enjoyed this chat so far. So what I normally do when I finish a podcast is I ask quick fire questions. But because I've got 3 of you, what I'll ask you to do is I'll each ask you to name the best player that you've seen, your best memory in rugby, and your worst memory in rugby. So we'll go worst memory, best player. So Andy, I'll start with you.
Thanks for that, mate. I was hoping Matt and Gareth would go first so I could have a think. So what's the first question? Go on, refresh me.
I'll go first if you want.
Go on, Gareth.
I'll go first. So we're starting with worst. The worst by far was the 2001 NFP semi-final between Rochdale and Oldham. So it was the game to get to the grand final. It was the year that Widnes went up, so it wasn't a great day for Leigh guys. The same day that was Widnes were winning at Leigh. But Rochdale were 32-14 up against Oldham. They'd scored 5 tries to 1 at that stage. And then Mike Ford came off the bench, and in the last 20 minutes, Hornets ended up losing 39-32. It's not as if I can remember every exact detail here with the scorers, as you can see. But there was over 4,000 people at Scotland that day. We had Danny Sculthorpe in our team, great back line. I think they'd have had a chance of beating Widnes the following weekend. And the final was at Scotland as well, so we'd have been at home. And there was this heartbreaking semi-final defeat where Mike Ford masterminded it. And I then had to drive back to the League Express offices in Brighouse about it and try and write a kind of reasoned report that said how brilliant Oldham and Mike Ford were, rather than sulking about the fact that my club weren't in a final. So I'll give that as my worst by some distance. Best memory. There's been a few, but I think overall I've been lucky enough to cover a couple of World Cups in Australia, and just for the occasion of it, seeing England play Tonga in Auckland and having 25,000 people in red shirts and families, Tongan families, shouting and singing hymns and cheering was just an experience like never before, and a great game on the day as well. Best player, I'll stick with Rochdale. So he's possibly more my favourite player than best player, although his talent was under no doubt. You know, John Woods, the year that Rochdale went up in 1989 to 90, so they only had 1 year in the top flight in my lifetime. John Woods was untouchable that year, just a genius of a player. And I know from seeing his performances at Lee and Warrington at Bradford that he did that elsewhere as well. So those would be my three.
Thank you, Gareth.
You've got to appreciate that I only started watching Halifax at the end of '98, and it's just been misery after misery since. So best memories are hard to come by. The worst memory is
Lee this season.
No. Get used to losing at Lee. One of my best ones is when Fax put 60 up Lee at the Share in 2013, which I'm sure you remember well.
I do.
Worst memory. I've been that many bad ones watching Halifax. I think the worst one, and they actually won the game in the end, it was in 2004. So they got relegated from Super League with 0 points in 2003. That was a fun year. And the year after, they ended up finishing next to bottom of the championship. And they had a weird thing at that time where that team would end up basically going into the League One playoffs. And then there was a grand final, which was effectively like £1 million game. So you played the other team, and they played York in Halifax, and it was at Widnes, Sintram, because they were getting a new stand built. And Fax took the lead, but then they got blown away, and they ended up behind by about 4 points. And Danny Brough was playing for York, and he went to kick a 40-20, and Ricky Sharif went to for just brain explosion. Rather than let it go, he sprints to it and bats it back in, but there's no other Fax players anywhere near. There's 2 York players, so the York player just picks it up and goes and scores under the stick. So Fax are 10 behind. A 10 behind with about 8 minutes to play, and I just bawled my eyes out because I thought, oh my God, double relegation in League One, what's going on? Horrendous. Anyway, we ended up winning the game, and Scott Grick scored it last minute, and even after we'd won, I was still crying. I was that upset. Couldn't contain myself, and I ended up getting Jamie Bloom's boots. I remember him giving me to try and calm me down. So even though we won, that single moment of that 40-20 were the worst. The best would be 2010 grand final when they beat Featherstone. They were 22-4 down. Was it? Yeah, we ended up on the pitch in first half because there was a fire. Someone had a fag in toilets in the Fax end. So we're not allowed to go on pitch. And then, anyway, yeah, we ended up going from 22-4 down, went to Golden Point, and Ben Black scored the Golden Point drop goal. That was probably the best memory. And best player, is that best player seen for Fax or best player of?
And in general,
it's subjective, isn't it? The player I've enjoyed watching the most in my time watching rugby in this country is Ben Barber. I just thought he was so exciting to watch. Not so much the best, but definitely the most exciting. The best generally would be. You know what? I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. I think Danny Maguire is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I thought he was incredible. So he'd be up there. And it's for Fax, my favourite Fax player. I mean, as I said, they've been pretty crap throughout my time watching them. But my favourite is Gary Mercer. He was my idol growing up. So yeah, they would be my answers.
There you are, Andy. You've had time to think now. So what?
Yeah, you'll probably be pleased with this, Ryan, because the majority of it's probably based around Lee and obviously the club I supported as a lad and growing up. Worst memory was probably the '87 Challenge Cup semi-final against St Helens at the Old Central Park. when we went toe to toe with a good Saints side, who ultimately lost to Halifax in the final. Matt, you'll probably remember.
I do.
Yeah. Well, that was a bad memory because we were in that game and more than capable of winning it. And I think it was John Henderson, the centre, who broke down the right-hand side and was heading towards the line, and he just got ankle tapped by Barry Ledger, probably 20, 30 metres out. And had he gone under the sticks or even just crossed the line, we'd have been at Wembley. So worst memory, because it would have been a day out at Wembley and something you never ever forget, but we didn't quite make it. Best memory, again, it's Leigh related, probably because I've not yet had the chance, with Rochdale. We've not made many memories, good or bad, have we? It's not. We've been stalled a little bit. So, as a director with Leigh, I was fortunate to be involved with a great group of lads and a good board and coaching staff, and we had a good day out at Halifax, and we won the Northern Rail Cup in 2013, which, as memories go, I was on the pitch with the lads at the end, and we brought the trophy back, and we opened up LSV and took the cup back and paraded it with the supporters, and we had a great night. So that was a great memory that'll always stick with me. Player-wise, I think in terms of who I've actually seen play live, is fortunate to see many great players. Seen the Australian touring sides and the GB sides back in the day in the 80s, and many great players, but Hanley always just sticks out. Ellery always sticks out in my mind as not just a great rugby league player, but probably ahead of his time in terms of an athlete. He was an outstanding athlete who could pretty much do everything. From he obviously over the years he played a number of different positions in the centres, half back, loose forward. He'd tackle anything that moved. Absolutely outstanding as a creator and a support player. Everything that you could think of, he could do it, Hanley, and probably ahead of his time in terms of athletically. He was probably more akin to the athletes that we've got today, and super professional by all accounts. I don't know the guy, but anybody I've ever spoken to who knows him has a lot to say about his professionalism and the way he can, he trained and conducted himself. So Ellery Hanley will be probably the best one I've seen live, and I can't really think of anybody other than my mate Andy Gregg will say, why did you not pick me? But no, Andy was up there. He was a legend in terms of halfbacks. I always tried to be an halfback as a kid and played junior rugby in the halves and as a hooker. And Andy was somebody I was in awe of when I watched him play for Wigan at Leigh and against Leigh. I've never seen anybody who could throw a pass from pretty much under the level with the post to it's a winger and a centre with accuracy and that bullet pass that he used to throw, and that cheeky little style he had and everything about Andy. So Ellery Hanley just pipping Greg over the line there, I think.
So I think it's unfair if I don't give mine. Memories I made you all think about yours. I thought I'll give mine. Worst one I'd say was 2018 Dewsbury away in the middle. Well, it wasn't the middle eights. It was the Championship Shield Super 8s. And Leigh ended up without any subs that day and had 2 injuries in the game. So I think we ended up finishing with 11 men and we lost 60-0 to Dewsbury. And with all due respect, you looked at Leigh and you look at Dewsbury, you never expect a score like that to happen. And obviously not knowing what the future held for Centurions at that time, you didn't. It was just a dark day. When trying to commentate on 8 points was awful to try and watch. I mean, to watch it was bad enough, but to try and commentate and get something out of the game was hard enough to do. And looking at like Mickey Iam after the game, he couldn't speak. Mike Latham, the chairman, was crying afterwards as well. So that goes down as the worst one, as well as the World Cup final when the ankle tap happened with England against Australia. Just when you think England have a chance here, that ankle tap happened, and unfortunately the Aussies won what was a very close, tight game. Best memory, I'd say. I mean, Andy, you're a Leigh fan, and you might appreciate this one. But when we got promotion against Huddersfield in 2016, when Martin Ridyard, someone who you all know well, ran the full length of the pitch in the first half, and I don't know if you guys were there, but I honestly expected someone to catch me at that point. Knowing Martin Ridyard, and he said it on the show himself.
I think he's still dining out on that, really. He's still dining out on that try, isn't he?
Whatever happened to Martin Ridyard?
Oh, he's still there, isn't he? I mean, we had him on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Saw him. I saw him last night. To be fair to him, he's keeping himself in it because he was. As I was coming home from the office down the bypass, he was running with Greg McNally. The pair of them were out looking in good shape. To be fair to the lads,
He's been to Chippy.
Well, he was. Yeah, I think he was heading towards Morrison. So you never know. Cafe was open.
Favourite player in the league times, I'd say one who's gone underrated. I mean, he's done a lot for the game of Super League as well. He's Mickey Ironman, performed for Saints, Wigan, Warrington, and just seeing the work that he does behind the scenes as well as on the pitch shows just what kind of to last that many years and play that many games in top level as well at rugby and to play for England and Great Britain to say that. But outside the pitch and someone who I know we're all thinking about at this moment in time, Rob Burrow. What a player he was for Leeds in that team.
Yeah, I mean, Mickey, as you say, you know, he's a living legend in Leeds. He's going to be, I think, in years to come, he'll be looked back on along the lines of John Woods, who Gareth mentioned. Because I think, you know, I know Mickey spent a lot of his career away in Super League with Saints and, you know, other clubs, Wigan, Warrington, etc. He had more clubs than Tiger Woods, I think, but. He's certainly going to go down. He's probably one of the most respected guys I've come across locally and in the game, and couldn't have any more time for Mickey. Absolute diamond of a bloke, and what a player, what a great player. I don't think he was ever really appreciated for how good he was, Mickey.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think that's it now for the Taylor Talks podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to join us on the show today. And we look forward to reading your articles. And Andy, good luck with Rochdale next season.
Thanks, Ryan. All the best, guys.
Thanks, Ryan. Cheers, fellas.